Twisted Tales.
Cinda Real by Dora Vagic and Zara Bojanic. Narrated by Mia Zara. Once upon a time, about 3 weeks ago, in a land far, far away, in a small village close by, lived Cinda Real, a girl with only one leg and a pair of crutches to help her walk. But don't think that the crutches got in the way of her daily chores. Not at all. Cinda was a very hard-working girl, and she made sure to make the most of each day. Every morning she prepared breakfast for her father, her stepmother, and 2 stepsisters, all the while humming a song and dancing, for there was nothing she loved more than dancing. As her beloved father was often too busy to sit down and have breakfast in the morning, he would usually just grab a cup of coffee, gulp it down, and kiss Cinda goodbye before rushing off to work. One morning, Cinda was happily making some delicious pancakes for breakfast when her stepmother and stepsisters entered the kitchen, looking at her angrily. Well, truth be told, they looked cross most of the time, but this particular morning they were particularly unhappy. "There she goes again, thinking she can dance," one of the stepsisters said when she saw Cinda twirling on one leg by the stove. Her stepmother and stepsisters sat down at the table, waiting nervously. Unable to carry the coffee pot and cups in her hands because she had to hold onto her crutches, Cinda used a tray hung around her neck. But as she hurried to pour the coffee, the poor girl tripped and spilled some of it. "What a clumsy girl you are, Cinda," said the stepmother, annoyed. Then she took a sip of her coffee and frowned. "This coffee is too weak, Cinda." The stepsisters took a tiny sip as well. "It's too hot," said one. "It's too cold," added the other. Cinda quickly apologized and went ahead with serving them the pancakes. "Girls, wait, we can't eat pancakes, not today," the stepmother exclaimed as she looked at Cinda, horrified. "Why not?" Cinda was confused. They usually liked her pancakes. "We're going to the prince's ball, and the girls' gowns must fit like a glove," announced the stepmother proudly. "Girls, we must get our tickets for the ball. Come on, chop chop," she ordered, heading for the carriage. Upon hearing about the ball, Cinda's face lit up. "Maybe I could go too," she thought as she rushed towards the carriage. "No time for dilly-dallying, Cinda," said her stepmother. "Our gowns won't sew themselves." She slammed the carriage door in Cinda's face, and off they went. Disappointed, Cinda watched the carriage disappear behind a hill. But she soon realized something. She could walk to the village herself and get an invitation to the prince's ball on her own. So she set off down the long, dusty road, supporting herself with her 2 crutches. By the time she arrived at the main square, a large crowd had already gathered. As Cinda was about to reach for her ticket, someone pushed her so hard she lost her balance and fell. At that moment, the stepsisters saw her. They screamed in disbelief. "What is she doing here?" said the older one. "She thinks she's going to dance with the prince," sneered the younger one. Suddenly, everyone was laughing at poor Cinda, pointing fingers as she crawled around on the floor, looking for her crutches. That's when somebody stepped on one of them, breaking it. Embarrassed and humiliated, her eyes filling with tears, Cinda grabbed the only good crutch she had left and, with the last bit of her strength, hobbled away from the crowd. After that incident, Cinda had no desire to return home. She stopped along the dusty road, looked around, and decided to go into the woods instead. It was getting dark, but Cinda kept walking, deeper and deeper into the woods, until she was so exhausted she could not take another step. Finally, she stopped under a tree and sat down on the ground, laying her crutch beside her and falling asleep. All of a sudden, an elderly woman appeared next to Cinda. Smiling softly, the gentle lady caressed her cheek. It was Cinda's fairy godmother, accompanied by 4 animals: a fox, a hedgehog, a woodpecker, and a badger. Since Cinda was still sleeping, the animals gently lifted her and carried her to a little cottage in the middle of the woods, where the fairy godmother lived, putting her in a bed and covering her up. Meanwhile, Cinda was dreaming of her long-lost mother, cuddled up with her father, both watching her dance. In the dream she danced beautifully without her crutches, happy and without a single care in the world. The next morning when she woke up, Cinda looked startled. She had no idea where she was. First, she saw the 4 animals looking mischievously at her. Then she heard some clattering and a pleasant smell coming from the kitchen. Her face broke into a smile and she grabbed her crutch and hurried towards the scent. "Good morning, my dear child," the fairy godmother greeted warmly as Cinda sat down at the table. "You may not remember me, but I'm your fairy godmother." She smiled and she placed a bowl of porridge in front of her. Cinda started eating joyfully. "You ran away from home, didn't you?" asked the fairy godmother, nodding to her affectionately. "Don't worry. You can stay here for a little while." "Thank you," said Cinda with a timid smile. After finishing her breakfast, Cinda ran into the garden, searching for a long stick. She quickly found one that seemed solid and long enough and began peeling the bark. "What are you doing, my dear child?" Fairy Godmother asked, looking out the kitchen window. "I'm going to make myself a new crutch," Cinda replied. "A new crutch? But what is it that you really need?" Confused, Cinda looked first at the stick and then at herself. "A new leg." "Exactly," replied the fairy godmother. I don't understand." Cinda was puzzled. "Instead of a crutch, why don't you make yourself a new leg?" "But I can't just make a new leg," said Cinda. "Says who?" said the fairy godmother with a smile. So Cinda got up and looked for a more significant piece of wood. This time she found a large log, but she did not have the tools to make anything from it. "What do I do now?" She looked at the log desperately. At that moment, as if answering her question, the badger appeared beside her. He sank his teeth into the wood and started cutting it for her. Cinda clapped her hands in excitement. Then the woodpecker came and began packing at the log. Soon the hedgehog and the fox arrived too. The hedgehog used his prickly spines to sand the log, while the fox coated it with its furry tail, making it all nice and shiny. Finally, the leg was finished. Cinda lifted it over her head and admired it. "It's perfect," she exclaimed. Now it was time for Cinda to try on the new leg. She put it on, carefully took her first step, and toppled over and fell. But she tried again. One step, then another, and she fell again. Cinda bowed her head in despair. "Well, aren't you pleased with your new leg?" The fairy godmother appeared in the cottage doorway. "It's no use. It's too wobbly," Cinda sighed. "I guess I'll have to make a crutch, after all." "Perhaps it is you who's wobbly, not the leg," suggested the fairy godmother. "Try to adapt yourself to the leg, instead of expecting it to adapt to you." The next day, Cinda rushed to the garden early in the morning and spent the whole day learning to walk with her new leg. Luckily, all her animal friends were there to help. After each fall, Cinda always got back up, determined to try again, and after many attempts, she finally managed to walk the entire length of the garden without a single wobble. The fox, hedgehog, woodpecker, and badger started shouting and clapping joyfully. They were soon joined by other animals: the deer, the bear, the frog, the rabbit, the wolf, the squirrel, and the owl. The fox took Cinda by the hand, and they began dancing to the lively rhythm of clapping. Before long, everyone was dancing. Even the fairy godmother wiggled her bum as she proudly watched Cinda's beautiful dance. When they returned to the cottage, Cinda saw a beautiful shimmering ball gown hanging on the wardrobe door in her room. "It's gorgeous!" she exclaimed excitedly as the fairy godmother walked through the door. "It's yours," she said. "Mine?" Cinda marveled. "Where could I wear such a special gown?" "To the prince's ball, of course." "To the ball?" Cinda looked surprised. "Yes, my dear child, it is time for you to dance." "But I don't have an invitation." The fairy godmother reached into her pocket and handed Cinda one. "Now you do," she said, smiling. Cinda's animal friends appeared in front of the cottage, riding a carriage they had made out of a pumpkin. It was the most beautiful carriage she had ever seen. Excited, Cinda climbed into it, wearing her beautiful new gown. She looked so beautiful as she waved goodbye to her fairy godmother. "Goodbye, my child," she said. "Now off you go and dance to your heart's content." "I will, and thank you for everything," Cinda replied and hurried off towards the palace. At the ball, the guests were already dancing to the music playing in the background. Cinda stood watching them for a while until she plucked up the courage to get on the dance floor herself. She was the only girl dancing on her own, but her dance was so magical that slowly everyone stopped to watch her, even her stepsisters and stepmother. "Is that Cinda?" the stepmother gasped. "No, it can't be," said the older stepsister. "Cinda can't dance." Then they saw the prince admiring Cinda as well. Angered, they squeaked, "Guards! Guards! That girl does not belong here. She belongs here more than you ever will." The prince told them off, ordering his guards to escort the 3 women out. The prince approached Cinda, holding his hand out to her. "May I?" Cinda smiled, and the 2 began to dance together in harmony that everyone swooned at the sight of them. "You are so pretty," said the prince, "and you dance so beautifully." I don't know about that." Cinda pointed to her leg. "I have a wooden leg, you see." The prince looked at her leg and remarked, "So what? I think it's the loveliest leg I've ever seen." Cinda was amazed to hear this. She never thought anyone would find her wooden leg lovely. When the dance ended, all the guests applauded Cinda's dance enthusiastically. She looked around in amazement. She simply was not used to this kind of reaction. "See, I'm not the only one who thinks you dance beautifully." The prince was smiling. He then led Cinda to the palace balcony, where they stood under a star-lit sky. "I have never met anyone like you before," he said. Cinda looked up at the stars. For so long had she dreamed of being able to dance, and now her dream had come true. She was immensely happy. "Do you know why I have invited all these people to my palace today?" asked the prince. "To dance?" The prince shook his head. "No, to find me a wife." He then slowly got down on one knee and took Cinda's hand. "Cinda, will you marry me?" Cinda gasped, pulling her hand away. "But I only came here to dance. Besides, we've only just met." "Oh." The prince looked down in disappointment. "But we can be friends if you want," Cinda suggested. This cheered up the prince considerably. "Yes, I would like that very much." They began dancing again, this time alone on the balcony under the starry sky. The evening ended, and the animals took Cinda home in their pumpkin carriage. Time for her to return home to her father. "I will come and visit you," she promised her animal friends as she said goodbye. When she opened the front door, her father came running down the stairs. "Cinda, thank goodness you're back." When she opened the front door, her father came running down the stairs. "Cinda, thank goodness you're back." He hugged her tightly, and they noticed she had no crutches. "But you're walking. How?" Cinda showed her father the wooden leg. Thrilled, he threw her arms around her. Cinda then looked around and noticed that the stepmother's things were gone. The shoes and coats of the 2 half-sisters were nowhere to be seen as well. "I told your stepmother and stepsisters that I never want to see them again," her father explained. "Are they really gone?" Cinda asked in disbelief. Her father nodded. "No one is ever going to hurt you again. I promise." That night, as Cinda prepared to go to bed, something made her look out the window. A familiar figure was standing below as if keeping watch over her. It was the fairy godmother. Smiling, Cinda waved at her. The fairy godmother blew her a kiss and then disappeared into the night. And so they all lived and danced happily ever after. Cinda and the prince became best friends, hanging with each other, playing, winning trophies at dance competitions, and every so often going off into the woods to visit the fairy godmother and their animal friends.